At some point in the last 300,000 years, a human being died, and instead of walking away, the people around them stopped. They looked at the body, and then they did something no animal on this planet had ever done before. They put it in the ground, on purpose, with care. That moment, that single act, is the line between us and everything else that has ever lived. Before that moment, death was just biology. A body fell. Other animals moved on. The ecosystem recycled what was left. Death happened to every creature that had ever existed on this planet, and not one of them had ever decided to respond to it with intention. And then we did. Here's what makes this strange. We don't know exactly when it happened. We don't know who did it first. We don't know what they were thinking. We have no words from that moment, no painting, no record of any kind, just a body placed carefully in the earth and the tools and flowers left with it, preserved in rock for us to find hundreds of thousands of years later. And that question, what did they think death was, might be the most important question in all of human history. Let's go back. The oldest confirmed burial site we have found is in a cave called Skul, in what is now Israel. The bodies there are roughly 100,000 years old. At Skul, archaeologists found something that stopped them cold. The bodies hadn't just been placed in the ground, they were positioned, deliberately arranged. One individual, a man, was buried holding the jaw of a wild boar in his hands, not dropped beside him, in his hands. Someone placed it there. Someone thought about what he should be holding when he went wherever the dead go. Think about what that requires. To bury someone with an object, you have to believe in something that has never been proven, something that cannot be seen or touched or measured. You have to believe that where the dead person is going, they might need something. You have to believe they are going somewhere. That is not instinct. That is not survival. That is philosophy, and it is 100,000 years old. But Skul might not even be the oldest. In 2023, a discovery in a South African cave called Rising Star changed everything scientists thought they knew about the origins of burial. Deep in a cave system so narrow that researchers had to squeeze through passages barely wide enough to breathe, they found something that should not have been there. Burials, not modern human burials. Burials belonging to Homo naledi, a species with a brain roughly 1/3 the size of yours. A species scientists had assumed was too primitive, too small-brained, too cognitively limited to understand death in any meaningful way. A species that had been walking this planet somewhere around 300,000 years ago, and they were burying their dead. The implications of that are hard to fully absorb, because if Homo naledi was burying their dead, then intentional burial is not something that emerged with modern human intelligence. It is something far older, something that runs deeper in our biology than we had ever imagined, something that might be one of the oldest things we do. Now, here is where it gets complicated, because archaeologists have been arguing about this for over a century. What counts as a burial? What separates an intentional placement of a body from a body that simply ended up in a particular position by accident? How do you prove that the flowers found at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, scattered across a Neanderthal burial site roughly 60,000 years old, were placed there by grieving hands rather than carried in by a burrowing animal? You cannot always prove it. And that uncertainty is actually the most honest thing about all of this. Because what we are really asking is, at what point did death stop being just a biological event and start being something that required a response? At what point did the absence of another person become something that hurt? We cannot see that moment. We can only see the evidence it left behind. And what the evidence shows us across dozens of sites, across multiple species, across hundreds of thousands of years, is that the impulse to mark death, to do something, kept appearing independently in different places at different times in our evolutionary history, which means it was not copied, it was not taught, it kept being discovered again and again by minds that arrived at it separately, by people who had never heard of anyone else doing it, who just looked at someone they loved lying still and felt that walking away was wrong. Let's talk about what the early burials actually looked like, because they are not what most people picture. At a site in Kafze, Israel, roughly 90,000 years old, a child was buried with deer antlers placed across its body. The antlers were not food. They were not tools. They served no practical purpose for anyone. They were placed with the child because someone thought the child should have them. At Atapuerca in Spain, in a site called the Pit of Bones, 28 individuals were found at the bottom of a shaft, 430,000 years old, the oldest known accumulation of human remains with evidence of deliberate placement. Among the bones, a single hand axe. One, beautifully crafted, made of red quartzite, a material not found near the site. Someone carried it from somewhere else, specifically, and left it with the dead. Researchers named it Excalibur. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal buried 60,000 years ago was found surrounded by pollen from at least 8 different plant species, many of them with medicinal properties. Someone gathered flowers. Maybe they knew those plants could heal. Maybe they thought healing was still possible. Or maybe they just wanted the person to have something beautiful where they were going. We don't know. We can't know. And that gap between what we can see and what we cannot is precisely where the most human part of all of this lives. Here is what we do know. The earliest burials share something. They are not random. They are not careless. They show evidence of thought about the dead person as a person, not as a body, not as a biological event, as someone who deserved something, someone who was going somewhere, someone who might need a jawbone or a hand axe or flowers or deer antlers or to be placed in a specific position facing a specific direction, someone worth the effort. And that is the thing that separates us from every other species that has ever lost a member of its group. Not grief, other animals grieve. Elephants return to the bones of their dead. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying the bodies of dead infants for weeks after death, unable to leave. Crows hold what researchers have called funeral gatherings, assembling in silence around a dead crow before dispersing. Grief, it turns out, is not uniquely human, but burial is. The response to grief that says this person deserves more than disappearing. This person deserved to be placed carefully in the ground. This person should have something to take with them. This person mattered enough that I will spend my time and energy making sure they do not just dissolve back into the world without acknowledgement. That response, only us. And here's the part that I cannot stop thinking about. When those early humans dug a grave and placed someone in it and put objects beside them, they were doing something that required imagining a world they could not see. A world after death, a journey that nobody had come back from to describe. They were acting on behalf of someone who could no longer tell them what they needed. They were doing something entirely for someone else with no personal benefit based on a belief in something unprovable. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that same impulse to act with care for someone in a place you cannot reach based on a belief you cannot prove is behind every religion that has ever existed, every philosophical tradition that has tried to make sense of mortality, every piece of art that has ever tried to hold on to something that was slipping away. It started in a cave, or maybe in the open air, or maybe beside a river, with someone who died and someone else who could not make themselves walk away. And whoever dug that first grave did not know they were starting a tradition that would still be running 300,000 years later. They did not know that every human burial since, every flower left on a coffin, every candle lit, every name carved into stone was a continuation of the thing they began. They just knew that this person mattered, and that mattering deserved a response. The first funeral had no priest, no ritual, no words anyone recorded, just hands in the earth, and the knowledge, however it was held, that the person in the ground had been someone, and that someone leaving deserved more than silence.